Shadowlands story is really starting to heat up, but as is the WoW cycle, we could start expecting a new expansion quite soon. Seeing that Shadowlands was something completely new and that changed the lore from the ground up, it is definitely hard to estimate what the next step could be. However, let's take a detailed look at the hints that were given and let's examine what could be the most likely upcoming expansion. Brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends, one of the most developed mobile RPGs. Check out my links to try it yourself both on your phone or your PC. Raid just introduced a new faction, the Shadowkin, inspired by medieval Japan. You have ninjas, samurai, and a whole host of mythical heroes. Shadowkin have some of the craziest looking champions such as Jintora, Toragi the Frog, and Infiltrator. What I really like about Raid is that there are so many factions, champions, and combinations you can make that it never gets stale, and you got everything from arenas to dungeons to working together with your clan. The game is constantly updated. This month, an insane amount of content will be released, 11 new champions, and almost 200 brand new missions, including 5 top levels added to every single dungeon. So use my link in the description to download Raid completely free for both your mobile and PC, and you can start summoning awesome champions as soon as you get into the game. Check out Raid Shadow Legends. No matter what you think about the Shadowlands, I think we can all agree at least on the fact that Shadowlands was something completely brand new and I'd say also unexpected, and that at least from the lore perspective, it really changed the Warcraft story from the ground up. About 7 to 8 years ago, Blizzard came out with the fabled Chronicle book, and the subsequent volumes followed, and this by itself shifted and retconned most of the lore and gave us a lot more broader view on the Warcraft universe. However, pretty much since Legion, Blizzard slowly but surely started making things a lot more great. It turns out that the Chronicle books were not an encyclopedia of just straight out facts, but more as in a quite biased view of the entire universe from a Titan perspective. Additionally, within these books, Blizzard, for the first time ever, introduced the very famous by now, the Cosmology chart. Now, of course, before the chart, we knew that the various forces across the universe existed. It was not a new concept, but we had a very basic, rudimentary understanding of it. I'd argue that we still probably do at this point, but at least the Chronicle kinda charted everything out and we got a lot more detailed representation, as in putting things into a perspective. Now, if you have followed the most recent happenings in the Shadowlands, you may have realized that Blizzard started further expanding upon this cosmology and kind of showing us that what we thought before was not so right, and that we definitely had quite a biased and limited perspective. 7 or 8 years ago, as Chronicle was released, a very basic understanding of the Warcraft universe we had goes something like this. An explosion happened, then light and void spread, the Naaru were created, and from the other light bits, the Titans were formed within planets through the world souls. They arose, started awakening other planets and reshaping the universe, while at the same time, the void was out creating chaos, which drove the Titans to get us crazy, and he created the Demonic Legion. Essentially, we had a view of light and Titans good, void and demons bad. We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. Well, Blizzard, slowly but surely, started introducing more shades of grey to this mix, and I'd say mainly since Legion, our view started shifting quite noticeably. Turns out that, you know those guys that we saved on alternate Draenor back in Worlds of Draenor with the Light? Well, the Light essentially waged war after this on the entire planet and forced everyone to become servants, pretty much ignoring their free will, led by none other than our famous ally Yrel. Then, Zera, the Prime Naaru, essentially imprisoned Illyria for even daring to think that the Void might not be so bad as they're saying, and she essentially tried to cleanse Illidan despite despite him obviously being against it. This led to the destruction of Zera and the Void Elves being created, and us embracing the Void a bit more. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that now Void good, Light bad, but the reality is that it is just not black and white at all. We were slowly introduced to the fact that the Light sees one truth and is incredibly zealous, while the Void sees many truths, and none of the two are actually bad, they just are. That is their natural state of things, and we are kinda just caught in the middle as beings of life. Of course, none of this is new lore to anyone that has followed the story since Legion, but Shadowlands did start introducing new things, and by the end of this expansion, I'm almost certain that we will have a completely different view of the Warcraft universe, and we will know what actually is going on. Here is what Shadowlands did. I'd say 3 very important but crucial things. First is that they introduced the first ones, which are a brand new concept. They are these very mysterious beings that are known as the architects of the universe, and they're above pretty much everyone else, even the Naaru or the Titans. Second thing is that they showed us that death is a force just like the Void and the Naaru, so it isn't a benevolent afterlife, but essentially kind of a selfish force that wants to expand as well, and that we, the beings of life, are bound to serve it for all eternity, even after life ends. And lastly, what Shadowlands did is that it expanded on this underlying cosmological war. Now, we did know that there was a cosmological war for quite a few years, and that forces across the universe battle one another, but it is now almost completely confirmed. For example, Renatal, when explaining Dreadlord origin, says that the Netherzeem were agents of death, and that they infiltrated their rivals, and we know for a fact that they infiltrated the Light, which prompted the fabled invasion of the Naaru into Revendreth. Additionally, we have seen a Void invasion in Bastion that consumed not only Bastion, but quite a bit of Maldraxxus as well. So what does all of this tell us? That the war is more than likely a supremacy matter, and close to a free-for-all. Void and the Light obviously battle one another all the time, but Void also battles life. Void invades Shadowlands, Shadowlands infiltrates the Light, and so on and so on. Now, you may be wondering, that's cool and all, thanks for the backstory, but what exactly does this have to do with the expansion after Shadowlands? The reason I went into this entire lore backlog is because I think this underlying storyline will definitely be the future of the entire Warcraft universe. Sure, Blizzard expanded since Legion on this, but they went really hard at it with Shadowlands, and my thoughts are that the next expansion will almost certainly be Light or Void related, or a mix between the two. Of course, not 100%, but odds are definitely on that side. Here is the current state of things in the universe. Azeroth at the moment is pretty much at a ceasefire, so the war never really ended, and the entire planet is quite destabilized. The leader of the now dominant alliance is Turalyon, who is none other than the High Exarch of the Grand Army of the Light. To add to this, as we pretty much helped Turel get into power and she now controls the entirety of Draenor consumed by the Light, we have this entire Light army waiting right behind a new Dark Portal, or should I just call it a Light Portal. Additionally, on the Shadowlands side of things, we have this Revendreth invasion that was recently expanded upon in the PTR. Keep in mind that there are obviously a few spoilers here from the 9.1 PTR, but essentially, Elune more than likely assisted Revendreth in this campaign, and the Light is obviously more than capable of invading the Shadowlands. Additionally, we have the entire arc with Anduin, who is now serving the Jailer, but the Light obviously helped him out when we were making our first steps within the Maw, and I think a Light intervention against the Jailer could be possible, as Anduin is more than likely a very significant asset. So, to simplify matters, everything is kind of all over the whole place right now, but there is obviously quite a bit going on with the Light. I don't think all of this stuff is just an accident. On the other side, what is also entirely possible for the next expansion is the exact opposite of the Light, and that is the Void. On this side, we obviously know a lot less, and we have a bit less hints than we do with the Light, but there are quite a lot of speculation theories going around, and quite quite a bit of juicy information is cooking right now. Let's get you what we know 100%. The Void at some point invaded the Shadowlands and nearly took over the entirety of the realm. Maltanaxus, the army of the Afterlife, defended, but they barely managed to score a victory, and it was quite possible that the Void at this point could have overtaken Death. The other thing we know is that the Old Gods and these Void Lords obviously know a lot more than they theoretically should. Il'gynoth predicted like half the Shadowlands with his whispers, and there are quite a few theories that the Old Gods are more than just tied into this entire Shadowlands storyline. Why this is important is because obviously the Ashara storyline really never ended, and there is still a lot more left to happen, and we also, most importantly, never really encountered the Void Lords. Since the very first volume of the Chronicle, we knew that the Void Lords are some of the biggest evils, if not the biggest villain in the universe, and we never actually saw them. I think what will happen in the Shadowlands is highly likely going to trigger their ultimate appearance. Now, I have a speculation theory which I'm actually making a video on in detail, but to put it in the simplest terms, my belief is that maybe the Jailer long ago actually worked with the Void Lords. Definitely reaching a bit here, but it could explain his betrayal and why the other Eternal Ones hate him so much. I think that the memory of the Void invasion that we saw in Bastion could actually have been this grand Shadowlands war where the Jailer decided to invite the Void to help him consolidate power, but then the first ones intervened, imprisoned him, defeated the Void, and created this entire mechanism that we have today. However, as you might know, he's pretty much going to break this mechanism at any point now, which might once again invite back the Void Lords, which could then lead into the next expansion. Obviously, could be overreaching here, but I think it does make at least a small amount of sense. On the other hand, on the mortal scale, we have this entire unsolved situation with the end of battle for Azeroth and this grand faction war. It is possible that the alliance with Turalyon leading it, and remember, Turalyon is actually of Lordaeron nobility, could be wanting to retake and reconquer Lordaeron and capitalize on the weakness of the Forsaken, which could ultimately also result in the final restoration of Gilneas as well. However, I doubt this could happen just by itself. I think it could be a part of this entire Light/Void storyline, as Turalyon as a servant of the light is perfectly set up for this position. Maybe the Alliance this time will go evil and they will open the Dark/Light portal to get the Draenor Light Warriors to attack the Horde, and the Horde, for the first time, won't actually be an aggressor in this civil war. They won't be the bad guy as they have been since Garrosh. However, ultimately, I'm almost certain the next expansion will either be Light/Void related or First One related, but definitely something on a cosmological scale. I honestly doubt they could just revert all this culmination back to a simple Horde Alliance war without the interference of these major forces. Sure, realistically, it might be a break from constantly saving the universe, but I think Blizzard right now went ahead so far that there really is no going backwards. I mean, we're obviously going to trigger some crazy event with the Jailer breaking free, Elune and everything, so I doubt at the end of the Shadowlands we will just fix this entire problem and get back to normal life. More than likely, while we fix the Shadowlands, we will trigger something crazy with the cosmology chart that ultimately, I believe, will tie in with everything I explained thus far in this video, and that is the Light and the Void connection. Thank you for watching. Check out what could be the Jailer's ultimate form by clicking on the screen, and also check out Doronsmovies Academy for videos on real world history and science. See you next time.